Hey everybody, welcome back to the Law of One Spiritual Advice Podcast. My name is Elle, and I return again to read some Law of One material, and I'll share with you my reflections and perceptions on it. So, today I have decided that we can speak about the veil of forgetting and the illusion of separation. Basically, if you kind of understand incarnation and reincarnation, and you have your infinite soul, well, then you incarnate here behind a veil of forgetting. It sort of means like you knew everything and now you don't. And why would you do such a thing? Seems like a silly thing to do, but what does it mean? And why are there maybe some positives and benefits to this? And just what we can take from that. And also, what is the reason for our density? What is the purpose of us being here, and how do we move on to the next set of lessons that are coming for us? So that's going to be the topics for discussion on today's podcast, and this will cover section 85.17, 85.18, and 85.19. However, I'm just going to read parts of them to make this a little short and sweet. So I believe that we will just begin with session 85.18. The questioner asks, after the veiling process, certain veiled functions or activities must have been paramount in creating evolution in desired polarized directions. I was just wondering which of these had the greatest effect on polarization. I am Ra. The most effectual veiling was that of the mind. And the next question asks, I would like to carry that on to find out what specific functions of the mind were most effectual and the 3 or 4 most effective changes brought about to create the polarization. Ra says, I am Ra. This is an interesting query. The primary veiling was of such significance that it may be seen to be analogous to the mantling of Earth over all the jewels within the Earth's crust. Whereas previously all facets of the Creator were consciously known, after the veiling, almost no facets of the Creator were known to the mind. Almost all was buried beneath the veil. If one were to attempt to list those functions of mind most significant in that they might be of aid in polarization, one would need to begin with the faculty of visioning, envisioning, or far-seeing. Without the veil, the mind was not caught in your illusory time. With the veil, space-time is the only obvious possibility for experience. Also, upon the list of significant veiled functions of the mind would be that of dreaming. The so-called dreaming contains a great deal which, if made available to the conscious mind and used, shall aid it in polarization to a great extent. The third function of the mind which is significant and which has been veiled is that of the knowing of the body. The knowledge of and control over the body, having been lost to a great extent in the veiling process, is thusly lost from the experience of the seeker. Its knowledge before the veiling is of small use. Its knowledge after the veiling, and in the face of what is now a dense illusion of separation, of body complex from mind complex, is quite significant. Perhaps the most important and significant function that occurred due to the veiling of the mind from itself is not in itself a function of mind, but rather is a product of the potential created by this veiling. This is the faculty of will, or pure desire. And that is basically the end of the quote. So I will stop there and we can talk about this now. Right, so as I was rereading that, I was thinking we probably need to talk about a few little sort of definition things in case you're not fully aware. So what's polarization? Well, polarization is, in this universe, there are seemingly 2 choices back to the Creator, the service to self path and the service to others path. So as you incarnate in your soul's, numerous incarnations, you tend to take on a polarization, which is that, I'm going to sort of have all my lifetime seeking service to self or have all my lifetime seeking service to others. And that is basically polarizing. So if you incarnate here in the 3rd density behind the veil, what you're doing is basically polarizing towards either service to self or service to others. And through that polarization, you're essentially creating power, desire, will, things of this nature, in which that will propel you forward to the next set of lessons into like the 4th density, if you will. So so we have this veil of forgetting. So let's talk about what happens, I guess, before you incarnate here. So then it is my understanding that we have a higher self. There are 7 densities in this in this universe, and there are, which is like a dimensions, if you will, and there's 7 densities infinitely, and basically you have 7 bodies, and there's seven's a big number, but to make it simple here, you have sort of a body within each of these densities, or it's almost like you are a multi-dimensional entity yourself, and you sort of have a body to travel through each density, right? So there's like all 7 bodies are in potential, and then as you move forward in your evolution, they go from potentiation to activation, and you essentially activate those bodies when they are ready, right? So this is sort of a weird thing trying to explain these things, because in the sense of timelessness, everything's already done, everything's already completed in a sense, and that means that you have a higher self, which is a 6th density version of you, assuming like right now I'm speaking to you and me who are both in the 3rd density. Okay, so you have a 6th density self, which is what my understanding is Ra explains is like an amalgamation of all your previous incarnations, experiences, and lessons, and everything that you know, and essentially that is essentially all the knowledge of your incarnations, and seemingly also a lot of knowledge of the creator and the universe. And before your higher self sort of absorbs itself back into the fullness of the creator in the 7th density and 8th, it leaves a little portion of itself, which is the higher self, to assist its previous selves in their incarnations. So that's your higher self, which is basically like this masterful you who's super compassionate and wise and filled with spirit, and is essentially the perfection of you who you are walking towards. It's essentially your future self. Ooh, isn't that fun, right? So imagine that, okay? So my understanding is that when you're like dead, or you're not in a 3rd density body, you are essentially within your indigo body, which is that 6th density higher self body. So this higher self body is very much in connection with the universe and the creator, and knowing seemingly everything to a degree. The creator is inherently mystery, but as you're really, really close to the creator at that point, your knowledge base of the entire universe is very unveiled, we may say, right? You basically don't have a veil to a massive percent. Okay, so you then would be in like the full knowledge of everything that is. You kind of get to see a bit into the past, the future, what all choices lead to this and that, etc., etc., etc. You're going to be very wise and whatever, right? So when you incarnate, you then incarnate into the 3rd density, and there's this thing called the veil of forgetting, which basically means that, no matter where you come from in this universe, if you incarnate in this earth, you are the same as everybody else, and that you sort of come here and you start from zero, right? You come here and you know nothing. Everybody knows nothing. You start from just complete unknowing, and then you build on that, and as your free will choices and maybe even some of the circumstances in your life determined, you move forward into whatever you're going to be seeking. So now there, some of the background I need to lay down is that before this experience that we're in right now, Ra speaks of like, I don't know, millions, billions of years. I don't know how long ago, right? But our universe has experimented with different, illusions, different densities of experience, in which there was like people who incarnated in a 3rd density without a veil. So it'd almost be like your higher self is incarnating on the earth, but you still get to know everything about the creator, which would, basically mean that like, it would just sort of be like you here right now, just knowing the perfection of every moment. No matter what atrocity or terrible thing happens, you are unconditionally loved from the creator, and absolutely nothing can harm you, because you are a soul of infinite worth and power, and the creator is just all-encompassing love, and it's beyond words, which imagine if that was your circumstance right now. Would you really really feel the need to go out? Would you not, and do things and search and find out things about life? I would assume what happens is when you kind of are in that situation, it's almost kind of in a way like maybe if you were like extremely rich, right? Like super content, and if you don't have other desires and wills and things, you're just too content, and you just sit there and you kind of rot in a way, right? It's like the good fruit is just rotting. So that's kind of the way that I like to see this difference between the veil, before the veil and after the veil. So then later on in later experiences, Ra explains that, our universe, our logos, as they call it, has come up with different creations in which there is a veiled process. And, the whole reason for the veil was essentially to increase polarization. As we put on this veil of forgetting and not knowing, all of a sudden, we're not very content. All of a sudden, we're seeking things we don't know, and we want to know, and we want to know and understand. And through that process, it causes seeking. And through seeking, it causes polarization, either polarizations towards the self or polarizations towards respecting self and other selves as one. So this is the idea of this veil of forgetting and this polarization. And then, they talk here specifically, Ra says the most effectual veiling was that of the mind. So I think, huge experience is of your mind, and let's go into that. So this illusion of separation is laid upon your mind, and you don't really know things. So there's a lot of, they say here, there's quite a few things that the veil created through the mind. I do like their analogy of the jewels within the Earth's crust. Right, they kind of give you a visionary thing. It's like you can see maybe the magma in the middle, and you have all these crystals around. And before the mantle of the earth was put over, it's like the crystals were seen, the Creator's beauty and essence and the reason for life and greatness. The geometrical perfection of the crystal and the beauty that it radiates out is obvious. But then after the veiling, it's like the mantle of the crust has been put over top of the crystals. The crystals have been hidden in the soil and the muck and the dirt, and you now have to go play in the dirt and mine through whatever to find the jewels within yourself. Right? So this, I like that. That's sort of, it's a nice little analogy or metaphor or whatever you want to call it. And then they talk here in the next part here about the lists of things that the veiling had created for the mind. So with this one, they're talking about the faculty of envisioning, or far seeing. So without the veil, the mind was not caught in your illusory time. With the veil, space-time is the only obvious possibility for experience. So this is an interesting little section, which I can just do a quick explanation on, which is that the veil in the mind, without the veil, the mind was not caught in your illusory time. So we are in third density in this analog of space-time. Ra says there's space-time and there's time-space. What's another way of saying that? Physical and metaphysical. So, right now we are very much in the physical, and we see things, and we see time moving as fluid, right? And then the metaphysical is sort of the opposite of that, which is hard to explain, but I don't know, what is then time in one space and the physical is fluid? Just think of it easier as sort of the metaphysical existence versus the physical existence. And, your metaphysical existence is things that you can't see, things when you envision, things when you dream. All of those things that aren't necessarily physical, you would consider, I suppose, metaphysical. So without the veil, and when you are sort of tapping into time-space, the metaphysical, instead of space-time, the physical, you're able to see the fluidity of the universe, and you can sort of see the past, and you can see the probability of different future probabilities, and you can see, maybe even sort of spiritual realities, if you will. So, after the veiling, you can't really see any of that. None of that is necessarily obvious or true. So then what you're really concerned with here in our third density is that you'll think that that metaphysical stuff is just whatever. Ah, that's silly. I just gotta go to work and amass things. But really, the metaphysical part of existence is also important, right? The love and the seeking, the envisioning, the dreaming. They go into this next part here, how they talk about the dreaming specifically. To me, that's sort of like a metaphysical existence, right? When you dream, I feel like what's happening is that you go to sleep and that veil of forgetting is somewhat lifted. And then you are, I suppose, you're probably like having the physical lessons that you're learning in third density, and you're experiencing them in a metaphysical environment in which that metaphysical environment is doing the same thing the physical environment is doing, which is trying to get you to polarize. So, I feel like when you're dreaming, you're essentially connecting up with your higher self, the deepest portions of your mind, who are very wise and know essentially everything about you, and somewhat give you visions and dreams to connect these things in your head in a way that helps you progress and polarize. So if you were really to take your dreams, make a dream journal or something, this would be somewhat a way of lifting that veil, or at least permeating through the veil, which would be like, hey, there's all this weird stuff that happens in my dreams as I journal it down and write it down, and I think about it, and I try to understand these sort of symbolic lessons and things that my dreams are trying to teach me. That will definitely aid in your polarization, right? But the veiled part of it is exactly what happens to you, well, I suppose to most of you and me a lot, every morning. You wake up and you're like, whoa, yeah, and you got all this truth and these ideas and these very, it's almost like you're like, whoa, having like these moments. Not every day, but then, just like that, it's gone, right? You're like, oh, wait, what was that dream about? Wait, what were those events? And to me, that's sort of like the veil and the physical and everything just coming back on you, and poof, all that knowing that you were just experiencing is gone. And that's okay. The point of that is, I think, in dreams is they still do influence our feelings and the way that we're going to, sort of move forward in the future. Whether you remember the dreams or not, they still feel that they're definitely affecting you. But anyways, that's a little bit unrelated. But so there you go. So there's the veiling of from envisioning and dreaming, and then they say the third function of the mind, which is significant and which has been veiled, is that of the knowing of the body. The knowledge and control of the body has been lost in a great extent of the veiling process. Yeah, well, I mean, this is pretty obvious, right? So in the law of one here, Ross states at another point, the body is a creature of the mind. I can't tell you how much that quote always sticks with me. So in knowing yourself, and really when you seemingly look at other people as well, whether they're aware of this truth or not, the body's a creature of the mind. Here's how I see it, okay? The body is, how about this? The catalyst of our experience gets given to us every day, right? It's essentially like, hey, here's a lesson. Are you going to learn the damn lesson? This is what you incarnated to learn. Here's your lesson. Would you like to learn it? Here's your lesson. Learn it. Learn it. Learn it. Every time you just refuse to, or you, whatever, you ignore it, or it just rattles around your brain and you don't really do anything with the catalyst, essentially what happens is repeated catalyst that is not getting through to the mind essentially is somewhat poisoning, right? And it will manifest in the body. Maybe not a way of saying poison. That sounds bad. The better way to I see it is that if the mind cannot pick up on the obviousness of the lesson will be offered to the body so that it cannot be ignored. That's really how I see it. It's like, wow, this is going to be a little vulnerable. Okay, well, I'm going to share this one because it's what's coming to my head. So here's one that I learned a long, long time ago before I knew anything about this stuff. So I was born and whatever, and when I was growing up, somebody kissed me, and now I every once in a while I'll get like a cold sore or something. Okay, so as I was growing up, what I noticed is that whenever I was stressed, whenever I was just way too, not taking care of myself, like maybe not eating healthy or drinking enough water, and mostly stress, though, stress and anger, and those types of emotions, right? I would all of a sudden get like a cold sore that would come up. And that would be obviously devastating because if you wouldn't, it's like this something that you just can't ignore. And not only that, you can't even like put anything on it, right? Everybody gets to see you, like when you go to school like this. So there you go. I felt like there's a very simple, easy example, and it's like, I wasn't realizing that I was stressed and angry. And because I went too long in that scenario, that caused a physiological response in my body, which manifested itself as something that I could no longer ignore. And when that happened, then I looked at myself in the mirror, and what? Obviously, this didn't happen the first time, but over the years, as over like 5 years, as it would happen like once a year or something, I would have that moment where, as I would feel it coming up, I would go, "Oh no, Elle, you need to calm down. You obviously have let this anger and this emotion run wild, and look what's happening now," right? So it's kind of a beautiful thing if you learn it. I suppose it's very tragic if you don't learn it, right? That the body is a creature of the mind, because then I can see what happening is you just feel like a victim of circumstance, and then you kind of get like a negative feedback loop. You'd be like, oh, you get stuck in this negative mind emotion, and you're obviously not learning the lesson, so it gets offered to the body, and then as it's offered to the body, the person can say, oh well, see, everything is as terrible as I always thought it was. And some people choose that. Instead, I suppose the more appropriate thing to do is try to figure out what choices and what attitudes you have that led you to have this experience, and what you can learn from it. And I just briefly say something about that too. When judging yourself and other people, I am generalizing. You don't know people's incarnational paths or lessons, so you do have to be careful about assuming too hard that somebody's having a physical manifestation in their body and it's like them not learning a lesson. That's not necessarily true all the time. Sometimes what happens is that we incarnate with a certain plan, and that plan can play out in a number of ways, where maybe we decided, the end of our incarnation, we will leave this place through a certain type of sickness or something, and we may do that for whatever reasons, so that maybe you're extreme. The one example I use usually is like, maybe you're an extremely giving, loving person throughout your whole life, and you really sucked at receiving love. So sometimes you sort of exit this density, being very sick and in a position where you can't give anything, and all you can do is receive love, receive that love back that you had given your whole life. And so, yeah, I don't know, just a warning as to not take those things too literal, right? The metaphysical and the physical is always a fine balancing between these things, where we can sort of use the metaphysical as a guide, but we try not to make any sure, 100%, yeah, I know this for sure, which is actually going to lead into how I kind of want to finish some of this up. But before I do that, we'll just talk about the last paragraph here. They say, perhaps the most important and significant function that occurred due to the veiling of the mind from itself is not in itself a function of mind, but rather is a product of the potential created by this veiling. This is the faculty of will, or pure desire. So as I read that, it's a very important part, and I'll be honest, I do have a little bit of trouble trying to re-explain it in another way. I already did sort of explain it, how it's this, what they just said there is sort of the idea that as you come into this third density behind the veil, you do not know anything, and that sort of brings within you this will to know, right? This desire to know, this fact that you have been separated from everything. Well, what have you been separated from? What is the creator? Who is the creator? Is the creator infinite? What is this all about? Those sort of attitudes, that is a will and desire. And that is sort of also, in my opinion, actually what brings power. So there's definitely this thing between will and power and manifestation. So as you focus your will on the desire maybe to serve, that focusing is it's very powerful. It's essentially you're saying, look, I am like I'm working out the muscle of will in focusing my desire to serve in every moment that I'm alive, or at least to what degree you can do that. And as your focus is becomes more somewhat constant, one pointed, if you will, that is like you saying you're increasing your power. And as you are behind this veil, you can focus on things like that, right? You're not going to know which is exactly like true or whatever, but as you do that focus, you're just, man, it's just so hard to put these into words, but it's somewhat the most important part of why you're here. If you don't have any, if you're too content and you have no investment in anything, right? You have no investment in seeking and serving and why you should do something. You're not going to have, basically you don't have any will. You don't have any desire. Let's take this a step further even and get a little bit weird here. I feel like our third density, there's a lot of entities here and people here who are trying to hijack your desire and hijack your will, try to give you all the goodies of life and contentment so that you somewhat act like one of those unveiled entities and you are just content and you are easy to control and you don't seek, right? You're just looking at that cell phone all day and then eating comfort food and then watching, some Netflix and then having just everything so nice and so perfect, right? As everything is so perfect for you, you may not seek. You become too content. You have no power. You're just a pawn of other people who are molding your desires. They show you the ads, right? They're trying to hijack your desire. They're trying to hijack your will, which in essence creates manifestation. So as they're able to basically get you off your focus, right? Off the focus of seeking the creator and instead seeking some physical gross manifestation of, cars and women or whatever, mates, just luxuries and things like this. They're hijacking your desire from seeking the creator and just seeking worthless physical nothingness. They're trying to make you content. Oh, we'll give you these things so that you don't need to do things. But really, it's like in the struggle, in the not knowing, is what pushes us forward. And that's where I want to end on. Ross says in another quote, it's imperative to essentially graduate from this density that one understand that they do not understand. Paradox, right? So I've also heard like anytime you hear paradox, you can know that you're standing close to spiritual truth. And that is exactly this point here, which is like some people think, they do understand. That's the intellectual mind, the physical mind. It's the space-time portion of your mind. Oh yeah, I understand everything. I got this. Right? Like, there is no mystery out there, just atheism, sweet. Well, that doesn't really sound like they're saying they understand, they do not understand. Does that not sound like the small self, the small third density self, and its arrogance saying that, I know what this universe is about. I need not seek any further. Science, right? Versus the other thing, which is like, hey, maybe I have the humility to say, I understand that I'm behind the veil. And, right, so that's an understanding that I'm behind the veil, but I'm saying that I understand, I do not understand, which is essentially kind of saying that, like, look, I know I don't understand the creator's plan. I know that I do not know everything. I know that it is me, the small self, who is trying to make decisions right now, and there is a larger portion of me who may know a little better, But, what I'm doing right now is I'm just going to be trying my best, and I'm trying not to be so arrogant as to feel that I do understand everything. I am willing to surrender to the will of the Creator, to a vision, that's larger than my small self. And I guess the idea is that I don't know for sure that any of this is true, right? It sounds really good. In my heart, it feels good. I feel like as I act that way, good things seem to happen. And that's all I can really say, right? So I'm not saying here that I know these things all as true and you should act as if they are true as well. I'm just telling you what I know and trying to somewhat explain at the end here that you got to stay humble and understand that you do not understand. And given all the confusion of our density, here's the last part is that Quo says in lots of places that the reason for our density is to confuse us. It's to baffle us. It's to basically bring that arrogant small self who says it knows and understands everything to a point of utter broken confusion that in its confusion and in its like somewhat giving up, it surrenders and it says, I do not know. All I know is love is true, and I think love and being compassionate, being a brother and sister of sorrow, right, to my other people out there, who are also behind the veil. This is what I know to be true. I feel like lifting other people up in this dark place lifts me up as well, and I'm going to do that. But the small self who is arrogant and says that it understands and knows for sure, I would say, is operating in the illusion of separation, and the veil of forgetting is working quite well. But that's the beauty of this density, is that we have that free choice. It literally is the reason why we are here, is to experience that choice between that small self who says, yes, I know, I understand, and I shall serve myself, or versus maybe the other perception which says, yeah, I understand that I do not understand, and in that I will attempt to serve myself and the other selves, because it seems that we're all one in the heart, and that love is good and worthy thing, worth of seeking. And I don't know, I suppose those are sort of your two paths. So I think that is enough rambling for today, my friends. It was a bit of a tough podcast to record, I'll admit, but thank you for sticking with me. If you appreciate my service and you'd like to support this podcast, you can go to the1infinitecreator.com and scroll down to the support sections, and I would really appreciate that, as I am attempting to step into this sort of thing more full time. And yeah, that's the same website that you can find links to all of this information for free. So the1infinitecreator.com. And then I have links to LL Research, which is the group who gives us all of this material for free, and we very much appreciate it. Okay, so thank you guys for listening. I hope you have a good rest of the week. I'm sorry I was a little late on this week's podcast, but I have my own catalyst in my life, and I needed a sort of day or two to just sit with that catalyst and let it digest and figure out what it has to teach me. And I got up today, and I still was sort of feeling in that mood, but I pushed myself to do this podcast in hopes of serving you guys, and I do hope that it does serve. And I'm already feeling much better just finishing recording this. So thanks, guys. I hope you have a good rest of the week. I'll try to have another podcast out for Friday. Take care.